goal of supply chain management is simple enough. It's to balance the supply and demand. That's pretty easy. And we're generally pretty good at setting up the parameters based on the assumptions that we make around the supply or demand. And where we run into trouble a lot of times is seeing how well those plans are working. And there are a lot of metrics that can tell you that, such as order on time, in full, supplier delivery, performance measure on your forecasts and things like that. There are a lot of good metrics out there, but inventory is also a really good one because you've got your production, you've got your sales, and if those two vary any, usually inventory is going to fluctuate because of that. So it's a good health check into your system, onto the reliability of your system. It's a good health check to see when you're getting close, when you're coming close to not being able to meet your commitments, to buffer against that supply and demand. And that's the reason I like to look at that inventory as a tool. So, I'm pretty excited about inventory. Maybe I need to get a life, but it's one of those things that I enjoy doing. And that's why I'm here today. But I want to warm up your fingers a little bit. I want you to use the chat function. And I want you to share why you're here today. What is it that you want to get out of this? What do you want to hear about? What is your interest? No wrong answers. So you've got that chat function. And please do share why you're here. No answers wrong.
Kevin, I think we got a shy group this morning, sir. We're not getting much participation.
We do. Okay, well, I'll tell you what. Let's let's jump in to some of the things that we do here. Whoops. Here we go. For inventory, I just hate this slide because it's one of those things where you go to a presentation and you always have that slide that tells you why someone thinks that you should care, okay? Why is it important? And you're always going to have this about why are we doing it? Why are we giving up an hour of our time? So here's some of the reasons why inventory is significant. And this isn't just stuff that I pulled out of the book. It's things that I've experienced in real life. First of which is the cost. Now, who knows what inventory costs annually? You'll find a different answer anywhere you look, but it's going to be significant. Some companies, in fact, there's one company online that talked to me about inventory because they had cash flow issues and they needed to manage it more effectively to free up some cash. Of course, the quality people will always say the quality, it hides quality problems, but also their production efficiencies, takes up space, yada, yada. But the interesting one is my boss told me to care. And actually that happened to me. And that's a good story about this because I was minding my own business one day and the boss popped his head in the door and he told me, we have an inventory problem. This is your new priority. And he was serious about it. And he was backing me up. This was a priority for him. And the significance of that is we were running along at about $250 million in inventory. And because of that one statement and that initiative, we took it down to $160 million in inventory. So that's a $90 million reduction in inventory, and we were increasing service levels along the way. So some of the tools that we used in doing that, we're going to talk about today, but it's significant and very doable. And if it's a priority, you can make that happen. We had to talk about inventory flows just a little bit. And, I did mention inventory management for people in a hurry. Well, they're different inventories that you're going to have in your system. You're going to have the raw material, you'll have your component, work in process, finished goods. You see the chart. and you know where you fall within that chart, and you know what inventory issues you have because of where you fall within that chart. The challenges for the inventory and the view of the inventory is going to be different based on whether we're looking at raw materials, components, finished goods, or whatever. So, you know, that's the flow of the material. The significance of that is that you really only need to look at one inventory category at a time. And the reason for that is the issues and the challenges. The flow is very different based on where your inventories reside. So you are not going to be looking at finished goods while you're looking at raw material. You're going to break them up in different categories and apply the tool that we're going to talk about to each of those. Now, just for simplicity, I'm mainly going to talk about finished goods, but that's where I want you to take notes, and I want you to share with me. I want to hear that say, okay, you know, thank you for the presentation, but my issue is raw materials, so or components. So maybe I'm more interested in the supplier relationship management or manufacturing predictability or things like that, because that's affecting my inventory. We'll have a breakout discussion, not today, but just whenever you want to, but we'll talk about the things that are specific to your business so that you'll get a better understanding of what we're talking about. Okay, so is inventory good or bad? I've got a supply chain background, but I also have a lean background. So when I was starting my lean education, I learned that inventory was bad. When I was doing my supply chain training, I was learning that inventory was good if properly used. Now, who's right? Well, we're not going to solve that today. But the only good reason to hold inventory is because it costs more than not to hold inventory. Okay, end of debate. So we're going to talk about the functional roles and where it does serve us well. And let's talk about some of those right now. I know you've got your own reasons, but you know, decoupling. You unless you're at one piece flow and you have your tack time down perfectly, your rate of production is going to be different than the rate of demand. The lot size, you know, you're going to, when you set up and run, you're going to make it at a certain quantity, and then you're going to stop production for a while. You know, you see the rest of them up there. We're using inventory a lot as buffer against unplanned events. And that's a big deal right there because especially now we have variation within our supply and demand. I mean, you see that everywhere you go, and that's been a huge issue, you know, since COVID. But it's not just the unplanned events. Maybe you're anticipating an event, you know, a shutdown or a promotion, whatever. So inventory has its place if it's properly managed. So that's those are some areas, some ways that we do use inventory. Now, I would be disappointed if I did not factor in one bad dad joke today. So I'm sorry, but you're gonna get that. So the question, and again, we got the chat, but I know we got a shy bunch. But why do you never see elephants hiding in a tree? Who knows the answer to that? Why do you never see elephants hiding in a tree? No answers on that?
I don't know, I don't know, Kevin. Why do we never see elephants hiding in a tree?
Oh, thank you, Misty. I'm glad you asked that because they're so good at it. Okay, that's your bad joke of the day. But inventory really is the same way. Inventory is hard to see. I mean, you're going to see it sitting in the rack, sitting in the floor. Is it moving? Is it not? Is it working hard for you? Is it not? You know, you walk by and you just see stuff and you really can't tell the story behind it. Even if you're filling the racks, you don't know how many weeks on hand you have. You don't know how much inventory you have in the context of how much you're using. That's very, very difficult to see. So you really need to have a process that allows you to see that. You need to let the data tell its story, basically, because you're not going to know what's going on otherwise. You're going to have the perception, like the slide title, you have too much inventory. But what story is the data telling you? Okay, and I'm a self-professed data nerd. Okay, I enjoy that anyway, so I'm going to go there. But it has a story to tell, and you have to use that to understand what is going on. Now, when we made our inventory decisions, we were basing those off of imperfect information. But also made it off of information that changed. So how current is it? You know, is it still appropriate? So we need a good way to determine whether that model that we made those assumptions under is still relevant, or do we need to make an adjustment for it? So this webinar really is about seeing where you are today based on those inventory decisions that you had already made. Well, looking at this slide makes my eyes hurt, so let's move on. We really can't talk about inventory without mentioning a little bit about Pareto. And, you know, it all starts with Pareto. He's the first to document the principle of materiality. And that's the basis for ABC analysis. And he said that controlling the relatively few vital, or the relatively vital few, will go a long way towards controlling the situation. I'm sure that most of you have heard that. What a lot of you haven't heard was H. Dickey came along with General Electric, and he illustrated how that principle can be applied to inventory management. So that's what we're going to be doing. Now, this is important. I know you all have heard this, probably tired of hearing about Pareto, but I had another boss poke his head in the door one day and said that he just got through talking to the CFO. And the CFO said we had too much inventory. So I said, well, you know, how do you know? And he said, well, it just feels like we do. And I said, okay, well, let's get a plan. What do we need to do? He said, well, cut everything by 2 weeks. So here I am managing, you know, $50,000 heart valves, and I'm managing that with the same intensity as dime a dozen drinking straws. Okay. And it was just crazy. And I also had around 14,000 SKUs. So I needed to manage all of those by cutting them by 2 weeks. Okay. That's crazy. Okay. You need to have a more intentional approach to this. And that's what we're going to share. So we're going to do a little ABC analysis on this. And this is whenever you look at inventory, it's hard to have that conversation without ABC analysis, but you're looking at the principle that 20% of your items are going to account for 80% of your dollars. Okay, so that's a significant few. Okay, you've got your B items where you next 30% of the items account for about 15% of the dollars. So you're going to look at those, but not with the same intensity as the A items. And that's when you have a little bit of extra time on your hands, whatever that is. And then you have your C items. That's just the rest of the stuff. And that's the other half of the items. They only account for 5% of the dollars. So they get very, very little attention. You know, and they don't get hung up on the classes. Just focus on the fact that only a few of your items represent most of the dollars. So you need to attack those first. And in attacking them, it's based on control, based on that classification. Now you've got two different, you're going to have plenty of low value items, and you're going to focus your control on the A items, the ones that have the higher value. That's a general rule. Now, I don't know what type is, type control is on that. That's up to you, for you to define. It's based on your culture. It's based on the volatility of your environment and the volatility of your inventory. We can talk about that, but the principle still applies. You're going to control some items much more closely than you're going to control the rest. One thing that I had done when I was in pharmaceutical supply chain was we had one component that had a very high value. And when I was trying to categorize everything by A, B, and C, this thing just blew the model out of the water. So I created a super A category. I put it in a class by itself just because it had so much value and affected the organization so much that it needed to be, managed much more closely than even your A item. So you have latitude on this. You can make it work for you however you need to. So the process is pretty simple. And the process is you look at your average or your annual usage for each item in dollars. Then you get your average inventory in dollars. So that's going to fluctuate, your actual inventory. So that's the reason why I say go for your average, so that you see about, where your inventory is holding at. And then you use the two above to find your inventory turns or weeks on hand. Those are two different ways of saying the same thing. Just basically how much it's moving, how much time you have before that inventory would be depleted if something were to happen. And then you review the items. The inventory will start telling its story. So it's not so much about data anymore, but it's becoming information. And then you're going to learn some stuff because, when you do that, so you want to document the learnings. Okay, so let's look at the chart. And this is the process right here. And as you're looking at this, please don't try to write everything down. I've got a much better template. It follows this principle, but it shows the formulas and everything like that. And I'll be happy to walk you through it using your information. Okay, so I'll help you there. So don't worry about the mechanics of it. Let's just look at the principle that we're following. So you've got your items, your SKU, the description, and then you have your annual usage in units. Well, I also know the unit cost, so it's pretty easy to figure out what the annual dollar usage is, and that's really important. So that's starting to get into the materiality, okay? Some items we spend a lot of money on, some we don't. Next column, the CPIM percentage, is where I'm starting to look at the ABC classifications. So in this example, the first two items represent 80% of the inventory spend. Okay, that's the critical items right there. That's your Pareto, your A items, the 20% of the items representing 80% of the value. And then your B items, well, that's going to be 80 to 95% of the inventory value. So I'm starting to stratify those a little bit. So I'm going to pay a lot of attention and have very tight control over the top two items. I'm not going to ignore the B items, but I'm going to be, watching them, but I'm not going to watch them as closely as the A items. And the C items, hey, that's only 5% of your inventory value. I don't want to run out. I want to always have it, but I don't want to manage it very closely. Okay, I just don't really care that much about it as long as it's there. And then based on the annual usage and the inventory that you have, you can determine your weeks on hand. And again, I've got that in the formula. I'll show that to you. If you prefer inventory turns, I'll give that to you as well. Doesn't matter. But as long as we see how the inventory is turning. Now, the principle here is that on your A items, you want them to go through your facility pretty quickly. You don't want a lot of weeks on hand on that because it is so much money, and it does affect your cash flow. On the B items, you want, you want more weeks on hand. And I don't know what the number is, it depends on your environment, and we'll talk about that. But on the C items, you want 6 months, a year, I don't really care because there's not much value. Now, in a perfect world, when you're setting this up, the weeks on hand would be about the same, for your A items, and then it'd be about the same for the B items because you're setting up the replenishments and the flow at some period of buffer based on your supply and your demand, and they would be about the same. But this is probably more of what you're going to see. I saw Misty threw the note up about let us know in chat. I'm doing a lot of talking, I know that, but please do throw any questions in if you've got them. Okay, the weeks on hand, you're going to set the system up where it's going to be pretty much the same as far as weeks on hand, but then life happens. So when I'm looking at this, I'm starting to get some information. Okay, it's no longer data, but it's turning in, it's starting to tell me a story. And on the weeks on hand, I've got 2 weeks on hand on the first item. I've got about 6 weeks on hand on the second item. I'm not too worried about that. Maybe that is the normal variation that we're going to see, and I'm okay with that. On the B items, I've got 13 weeks on hand. That may be okay, but when I see 61 weeks on hand, I'm really worried about that. Something's wrong, okay? And that's simple, because a B item, whether it should be at 3 months or 6 months, that's okay, but you should never have over a year. Okay, so let me see. Okay, Dwayne just asked a question. I'm seeing some of these chats, so bear with me or come off mute and chime in if I do miss something. The 61 weeks on hand for that fourth item, that requires you to ask some questions. What's wrong? What's wrong with that picture? Is it a promotion and we bought more than what we wanted to because we had a price break or something? Is the bill of material wrong? Is the forecast, did it tank? What's going on there? Is it inventory error? I don't know the answer, but boy, that sure does raise a red flag, and it says you need to look at that because your flow and your inventory is not what you thought it should be. Now Dwayne asked a great question, and I love that. I gave you that previous slide that said what your A item should be, your ABC, and it was 20%, for your A, 30% for your B, and the other 50 for your C. When you're looking at that cumulative percentage on that, the bigger data set you're going to have, the more cleanly it's going to fall under that Pareto principles, okay, the 80-20. But I don't really care. I just want to get close on the ABC. The ABC means nothing to me other than that I want to manage that item a little bit more closely. So in this case, I've got 2 A items, but you know what? If I felt like I only needed 1, if the second item didn't qualify, perfectly fine, but use your judgment. I mean, you know more about your business than I do, and you know about where it should fall, but and there doesn't have to be a clean break. You can manage your A and your high Bs, with a greater intensity, whatever, but just make it fit. Okay, make it fit as best you can, and don't worry about those percentages at all. Just know that some items you want to have a tighter control and you want to look at them more closely. Now, here's the significance on this, is that when we're looking at the weeks on hand, and ultimately you're going to make an adjustment. You're going to find out it's different than you should be. So when you make that adjustment, it is going to affect the value of the inventory, and it's going to shock the system a little bit. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but just know the impact that you're going to have. The A items are going to have more influence on your supply and demand than effect on the C items. Let me see. I think that I did miss a chat.
Yeah, Kevin, we got a couple of more questions. Blake Ramey made a comment. This is a great way to look at inventory. He's known about the Pareto principle for a long time, but never thought about the application to inventory management. And then had a question, what is the CUME% short for on your chart?
Okay, and let me see here. Missy, what was the last part that you said, please?
What is the column, the CUME% heading? What does that stand for okay. On your chart?
Yeah, I'm sorry. The funny thing is, it's like inventory. I'm so familiar with this I know what the formulas are behind it and I don't see that. Okay, thank you for that reality check. Cumulative percentage. I'll just tell you what it is, basically. The total value of the inventory in this scenario is $145,900. You see that at the very bottom under annual usage. The first item that we see, the doohickey one, basically, the average annual usage is $99,756. So $99,756 divided by the $145,000 is 68%. What I do then is when I look at the next, I'll then add in the next item in the list, that doohickey 6, basically. Now it's at 17,000, about 900. And of course, I went to public school, so my math isn't real good, but that represents about 13% of your total inventory value. So I add that 68% plus the 13% of the second item, and that gives me the 81%. So ultimately, and again, those items there are sorted in descending order of annual usage. So what I'm doing is that it's a cumulative percent as you go down that list of annual usage. And that tells me where my inventory is lying. Now, what you're going to see is when you get down to the C items, you're about halfway down there and you've already come up with about 95% of your inventory value, before you even get down there. So you add another item in there and it doesn't move the percentage at all. And that's pretty typical. I mean, that's pretty typical of what you're going to see. Did that answer the question? Okay.
Yes, sir. I believe it did. He said, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. And again, if you've got, if you want to do something with this and you want to play around with just your inventory, we need to talk, because I've got the tools and I can walk you through how to use it. And then the fun part is after you've done it, let's talk about the results. What did it tell us? What story did it tell us? What's wrong with this picture? What's right with this picture? Now, a couple of things are going to come up. A lot of things are going to come up. I promise you that. But there are two themes that I see a lot of times in this scenario. The first of which is an individual item will have weeks on hand that's going to be far different than what you expected. And that's something very unique to that individual item. So it requires further investigation because something's happening different than you intended. But another thing can happen as well. In general, you will have set the number of weeks on hand that you're going to want to have for a category. Well, if the actual numbers come in either above or below what you had intended, you've got a systemic issue going on that you need to address. And here's an example. Let's say if you consistently over forecast your demand, okay? Well, if you over forecast it, that means you're not going to be selling as much as you thought you would. But the forecast drives production. So you're going to produce what you had forecasted. You put those two together, inherently, you're always going to have more weeks on hand than what you had anticipated. And again, this would be for a finished good item. Another scenario is that you could overload your master schedule. And you could say you're going to make more than what you're actually going to make. Well, guess what? You're going to purchase components and raw material based on what you want to make, even though you can't make it. So those materials are going to come in and they're not going to move as quickly as they should because the master schedule is overloaded. You can't produce it. So therefore the weeks on hand are going to be greater than what you had planned for. So you need to look at individual variances. You also need to look at systemic variances that you're going to find. And a little bit of both usually occurs. Okay, I think I have beat that to death. So let's move on. Implementation is the week Sibling. Misty, are you happier with that? weak sibling?
I am, yes, sir, I am. We won't tell the group what you had there originally, but yes, I'm much happier with that.
Okay, I'm more politically correct, so that's good. So, you know, it's really a lot of fun to create this scenario and create the template and to get that information. And then once you've got it, you want to do something with it. And, you know, the analytics, they're easy. Implementation is the hard part because there's something going on that was different than what you had planned for. So you have to make an adjustment. You have to make decisions. You have to make actions on what you're going to do based on that information. And again, it's somewhat difficult for some people to understand what it's telling. So implementation can be pretty tough. So of course you look at the plan versus the actual. Why is it different? You know, of course you document what you learned. If you want inventory reduction or growth, how aggressive do you want to be about it? And of course, you work on what matters most. So you want to measure the results. You know, what was the last action? What was the result of the action? And what are you going to do next? And then how often do you need to look at this? This is not something you're going to do weekly. You know, this could be on a monthly or quarterly basis, maybe only once a year. I don't know. But actually putting this data and turning it into a plan and executing that plan is really the more difficult part. And here's why. Here's why that is so difficult. No, I'll cover that on the next slide. I'm sorry, a little off track here. Things that I've learned, A and B items, if you're not getting a little nervous about running out of stock, then you've got too much inventory. What happens if, oh, shoot, I'm missing some of these notes. I'll finish the slide and then get back to what you had missed. For A and B items, if you're not getting a little nervous about running outside, you got too much, okay? For C items, something really crazy has got to happen that's going to cause a stock out. And the inventory is always a result of other things. So it's very seldom an inventory problem, but you may have an issue with demand rate, supply, lead time, which has been highly variable, and then a number of other issues. So you're going to find a root cause in there, and then you'll control what you can control, and then adapt to the rest. Okay, so Misty threw in a question. What happens if my plan to actual gets blown up, as in a tornado or typhoon or major event? Okay, that's actually a realistic question. And we get into a cultural decision because I'm gonna go back a few slides. I'm gonna go up to this one, and I'm gonna look at those weeks on hand. Well, a company will have a risk tolerance, okay, a culture of risk tolerance, and too much inventory is expensive. Not enough inventory is also expensive because of lost sales and expediting and things like that. So you have to set these weeks on hand to address the normal variation that you expect to see in your business. It may be seasonality. It may be orders being a little bit early, a little bit late. It may be forecast variation, whatever. I mean, we're never going to get that perfect. But this is addressing the normal and reasonable variation that you're going to see in your system. So for Misty's question regarding that catastrophic event like COVID or hurricane, typhoon, natural disasters, and things like that, the question is, what is your risk tolerance for those events? No one in the world could have enough inventory to have protected them against COVID, okay? And the abnormal events really come down to, regardless of how much inventory you're gonna have, it's never gonna protect you against that event, that catastrophic, because we're talking about normal. So for those catastrophic events, you've got to have the manufacturing resiliency and you've got to have the flexibility in your plans to be able to fulfill that supply, basically, when that crazy event occurs. Now, we live in Tennessee. We have tornadoes, we have earthquakes, in Tennessee, and the next big one may happen. So there are those disruptions. But the question is, inventory is not going to be your answer on the big ones on that. Fires and severe. But inventory generally is not going to be the answer. It is effective at addressing normal variation that you see, normal and typical. And but we got that may be a subject for another webinar on business resiliency for the catastrophic events, business continuity, how do you address those? Okay, so the obstacles to the success that you're going to see, this is part of the implementation that I was talking about on the earlier slide. So here I am, and I'm an expert, I'm a nerd, I work through the numbers, and I know what the data is telling me, and I know what story it's telling me. So I know what needs to be done. Okay, so I come in here and I say, hi, I'm an inventoryologist from the University of Tennessee. Let me tell you what you need to do to fix your inventory problem. And I can promise you, I will not get very far. In fact, I'll fail. In fact, this is one of those areas where you can have perfect data, but if you don't recognize the obstacles that you're going to have at implementing this plan, then I promise you, this is where you'll fail. Because, and I'm speaking from experience because this is where I have failed in the past. And let's talk about it. Let's see if we can wake this crowd up a little bit. What are some of the obstacles that you all would have to carrying more or less inventory, to increase the inventory that you've got on hand? How about to decrease the inventory you have based on what you saw on week 7? So let's see if we've got any one who wants to chat. What obstacles have you seen to making those changes?
You also feel free to unmute yourself and speak up too if you want to do that. We got scrap management, Kevin.
And on scrap management, that's I love that. Transportation. Oh, we're looking at fluctuation in sales. Yeah. Okay, let's pick on this, Blake. You got a good one right there. Fluctuation in sales. I've talked to people and say, yeah, I know the forecast says that, but I know differently. I know it's not that. We're gonna sell more than that. I'm gonna buy more, because I know that inventory is wrong. And that's a good one. And that's been learned from history. Setup time, forecast accuracy, customer contracted inventory requirements. That's a great one. That's a good one. Okay, long setup time. That's good. And I'll add to that variable setup time at supplier. Material master setup accuracy. By golly, if you've got a problem there, it's going to show up every time, and you'll learn in a hurry. Those are some good ones. Supply chain lead times, perfect. And especially now, when Misty was talking about typhoon, well, some of the supply chain lead times now are the normal variation that's just been redefined. Okay, so those are a couple of good ones. I don't think I've got anything else, but these are actual things that I have heard that really they align with what you all just shared. Yeah, ship on the water, for waiting for weeks. Isn't that crazy? Okay, so these are things that I've heard, and this can be talking to the people who are ordering the materials. It could be the planners, it could be the buyers, it could be any number of people. But I've heard the supplier is always late. Well, if we've got the system set up to have a standard lead time based on that supplier, if it's wrong and it's taking longer to get that and the lead times are incorrect, then we're going to have less inventory than what we had anticipated. having less inventory, we're gonna have less buffer than what we had planned for and what we thought we would. So that's real. And I had done that. Okay, I was in a planner buyer role, and within that role, I would know that a supplier would be late, so I would see a planned order and I would pull it in and I would order it ahead of time. I would go ahead and release the order. So you got a number of those in there, and these are not people who are resistant. It's just that people don't run out. They don't want to run out of their stuff. Okay, they want enough to make their product. They're going to pull a Kanban card early. They're going to do what they think because they don't believe what the system is telling them. You want this conversation, and you want people to push back a little bit and say these things, because people data analytics are important, but people are the ones, all people making these decisions are the ones that are going to change the number. Just toggling something in the system will not do that. And so I embrace that. I'll ask those questions. I had one where it said, Bob told me when to order, to order 2 boxes. And this was the classical C item. I said, who's Bob? Well, I had to ask several times, but he was the material manager 3 people ago. But that person had remembered what they said and they wanted to do the right thing. So these are the things that you have to embrace, and you have to accept those, because these are the obstacles. That's the hidden culture that has to be addressed as well. And you have to talk about it. You have to have those conversations. Okay, so if a supplier, okay, I'm gonna check that out. The supplier can provide lead time, then material master can be set up to accommodate that lead time, and POs sent out accordingly to help both sides. That's right. And the really important, I agree completely, that's keeping the system current, which is kind of hard to do sometimes. And lead time is a standard lead time, usually, based on the standard order quantity, based on typical supplier performance, and those things do fluctuate. So if it's taking you a little bit longer than that, you're going to see that in the variation from the standard. And this inventory in weeks on hand is a good way to see when that information and that data that you put in the material master and the actual POs and even measuring supplier delivery performance, they'll tell you whether the assumptions that you're making are still current. So that's a good thing. So those are good things to check. But that's some of the obstacles, and you have to address them. And actually, it's pretty exciting on the things that you'll find when you do that. Okay, reporting. We're getting toward the end here. I would hope that everyone on this call has got some type of current inventory reporting system. I would say use that inventory reporting system if it shows your progress over time. Because when you're looking at this and you're wanting to reposition and change some of your inventory to protect yourself against the supply and demand fluctuations, you're going to make that change and you want to see the effect of the change. So what you really want to do is have an inventory system that does allow you to show the effect of that change, and it shows you that progress over time. Now this is all old school, simple, plan, do, check, act, okay? And reporting is the check step in here. And then based on that, you're gonna have some actions or so. But this is this is very important to see if it's operating as you intended it to. You can include this in the normal business review that you do. I mean, it's not something you have to look at daily. And if done well, then the sustainability is going to be guaranteed. So if we're looking at maintaining current lead times within your system, updating for supplier reliability or unreliability and things like that. If you do this on cycle, you're going to identify those trends and you're going to continue the improvements. So that is absolutely important. Now, one thing that we really didn't talk very much about was the target and how much inventory should we have on hand. And I did look at some of the people who were attending this webinar, and actually there are a couple of companies that I've worked with to determine that. If you want to get into that a little bit more, let's have a follow-up call, do that one-on-one to talk about some of the options that we have available. Because primarily we're just talking about what your inventory is. And we really didn't have time to get into what it should be. So then again, this is inventory management for people in a hurry. So that's just one of those parking lot items that I'd like to address, but I'm just not able to do right now. Now within that reporting, you're going to be seeing what it should be, but also you're going to see a difference. You know, how often are you stocking out? How often are you expediting? Am I improving? That's a really interesting story right there to show. The reporting needs to show that. So let me throw you a couple that tell you 3 different pictures of the inventory, and you probably have one that's better than mine, but I'll just show you what I've used in the past. On this one, I wanted to see where my inventory value was. So I looked at it based on product family. And this is pretty typical, but remember the 80-20? You know, in this case, the first 2, maybe 3 items are representing 80% of your inventory value. So if I want to make a big difference in the value, this is where I'm going to look. And I'll know to focus on this. The really interesting thing on this was that the second item, the Scalaxin, and then, it's mostly real data. Mostly I changed it to protect, but Scalaxin represented about half of our revenue. So, why do we have so much on Bacillin? And what we found out was that we would produce a batch, it would expire before we would sell that batch. So we had to carry a lot in inventory. So what we did was we would produce that batch, but we wouldn't package. We would throw away about half of it and only throw and then only make the portion that we thought we would sell. And that minimized our cost of goods manufacturing. It minimized our storage costs and requirements, and it gave us a much lower profile and correct inventory value. So you learn things. You ask better questions when you see where your inventory is and where you need to focus on. And I would never have come up with that conclusion on my own without first looking at a Pareto on that. Another way of looking at it is production sales inventory. And we're looking at a product family or an item. Now, this is really good way to report it because you can, let's call it product family and stick to that. When you make adjustments to how much inventory you should carry for a product family, you should see those in time. Now, it depends on how aggressively you're going to implement those changes. But when you make a change, and that's your action, you want to check to see what effect it had. And this chart shows it. It's a production sales inventory. So if I purchase more, also I can manufacture more. It could be the same thing. But if I want to increase the inventory, I can see when the effect of that decision took place. It's another good one to show how much buffer, how much protection you've got against sales variations. Because in that, the green bar, that's my inventory. And if I measure that green bar according to the sales, which is that aqua blue or whatever, I see that I've got a lot of inventory relative to the sales, the monthly sales that I've got. So it tells me how much variation I can absorb and when I can. And that's good for showing a picture, telling a story to the executive level about your ability to adapt to those changes, how much protection you really do have. And I like that. Like a friend of mine said, you change once, but you don't change all at once. Well, this is a really good one to measure that gradual change over time and to determine the effectiveness of your actions. And then the final reporting one. Sometimes I just want to look at the aggregate inventory picture. I want to see it all. And this is a good one that shows your individual product categories and whether the total inventory profile is increasing or decreasing over time. In some cases, you're going to want it to increase. There's one company on the call that has a heavy seasonality within their for their product. So I would have the expectation of before the heavy season to occur, that we would see a growth within the inventory. And if we don't see a growth in our inventory, then we got a problem, because sales are about to increase beyond their ability to manufacture. So that is a really good one right there. And it's just telling the story about what's happening to your inventory. And that's much more useful for me than some general ledger amount. So I don't know what to call this slide, whether it's next steps, whether it's aha moments, but just share with me on some of the takeaways, things that you would like to see more of, some of the things that really resonated with you. Okay, so you've got my contact information right there, either email or my cell phone. With what Misty said, don't try that on your own. I mean, I've got the template. I've got the template with the hidden columns that have got the formulas in there. And also I've documented that spreadsheet so that it will show you the steps to make. Well, probably what we would want to do is, if you're interested in it, reach out to me. Say, hey, let's set up a little Zoom call, make it about an hour, Zoom call. And what I would do is I would ask you to have some information on hand. Doesn't have to be all your inventory information, but I just want some data subset to work with. And what we'll do is we'll build it together on that Zoom call using that information. And I'll tell you ahead of time what you need to have ready. And then actually I'll have you do it based on the template, and I'll just walk you through it. And then the fun part is, well, what's wrong with this picture? Let's look at our weeks on hand. Is this what you expected? Why and why not? And let's document some of that. 1 hour, we can cover a lot of ground in that, and you'll know that tool inside and out. But yeah, reach out to me, because this could be fun.